Done very professionally, have they?
Sarvana Jai Shri Krishna, a very warm welcome. Good evening to all. Jai Swami Narayan, Sai Ram. Lovely to see you after 5 weeks of break. And I'm sure Daksha and Caroline had a good break from us all. Let me start off with Omkara. And then today's subject is on fasting. This was recommended by you all. So we're going to discuss about fasting. Let's start off. Om. 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 Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. We've just had 10 days of fasting, Navratri. I don't know how many did the fasting, but I'm sure everybody enjoyed dancing away 10 days and must have lost a little bit of the weight. It's a good exercise, just like our Zumba and yoga, keeps you going and keeps you healthy. So let's see how Caroline keeps us healthy by fasting.
Oh, thank you. Can I just ask what that fast involves? How long do you fast for? I mean, are you able to eat at all?
Well, that 9 days was, you can either do just by eating fruit, or just drink water, or one meal a day.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is really strict. So if people can do it, they do it.
Yeah.
It's continuous 10 days.
So each day you try to minimize what you're having. Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Good. Right. Well, thank you. And I say we've missed you. For me, the 5 weeks has gone quickly because I've been really busy. But it's lovely to be back with you all again. Am I able to share my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. There we go. It's working for once. So hopefully you can see my slides now. So at the end of the last session, the subject that a lot of people seem to want to discuss more was fasting. Fasting in terms of, rather than religious fasting, what we mean by fasting in the real food and the nutrition sense. So I'm just going to take you through that. Try not to talk for too long so that people can ask lots of questions. But I'll just do the usual disclaimer. Oops. Where's that gone? There we go. Obviously, I'm here just to pass on information. I'm not here as a medical professional to tell you what to do. And if you are on medication for any significant medical condition, particularly diabetes, blood pressure, things like that, and you are going to make significant changes to the way you eat, then please do discuss it with your GP or practice nurse so that they can keep an eye on your medication. Because if you do make improvements in your health through a certain approach to food, then often you can reduce or even sometimes stop certain medications. So it's important to keep an eye on that. But yeah, so fasting was requested, and it's obviously very important. And many of you will be used to doing religious fasting, so the concept is not very alien to you. But there is a very significant difference between fasting and starving. So fasting is a means by which you can reset your hormones when we're talking about it nutritionally. But hopefully around the time you're fasting, before and after you fast, you will be eating extremely nutritious food, and your body will not be starving, as in deficient in nutrients. The body is designed to be able to cope with significant periods without food. And in fact, much of what's wrong with modern life is we have far, far too much food and we eat far too frequently. And our body doesn't have a chance to really properly metabolize and digest and sort itself out because we're bombarding it with food far, far too much. So fasting is actually an extremely healthy thing to do. So those of you that do cultural, religious type fasting, historically they've had the right approach, and it's really only probably in the last 40-50 years that we've had access to so much food, and so much food that's actually not good for us, but also just far too much food. And we've kind of got into the mindset of thinking you need to be eating frequently. So it's really good to fast. So it's really fantastic if you are already incorporating fasting into your life. But it is important when you're fasting to kind of understand how to do it to the best benefit for the body. So when we talk about fasting, we're sort of looking at how the body works, and basically our body should either be in a fed state or a fasted state. We're meant to cycle between these two states. And when we don't eat, our insulin level falls. And as you know from previous discussions, one of the problems, particularly if you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, is that you become insulin resistant because your body is receiving far too much sugar on a constant level, and it can't cope with it, and it's demanding more and more insulin, and eventually the cells aren't responding to insulin the way they should. So one of the ways to get insulin levels down is not to put in the request for it by not eating foods that get broken down to sugar. So we should be cycling in and out of these fed states and fasted states. And when we have had a period without food and we suddenly need energy, we've got kind of what I call the fridge and the freezer. Again, you may remember from previous talks, we talked about the fact that when you eat a lot of carbohydrates, anything that you don't need for energy gets stored as glycogen in the liver for emergency sort of resources, and then all the rest of the excess gets converted into fat and disappears to all the places we ladies particularly do not want it to be. So the liver is a bit like the fridge. You've got a fairly easily accessed source of energy. so that when you've been fasting and you suddenly need a bit of energy, your liver has got enough glycogen in there to sort of sort you out. But if you fast for prolonged periods of time, it's still perfectly safe. And unless you are absolutely skin and bone with no fat anywhere in your body, you have got a wonderful freezer full of nutrients and energy that will keep you going for weeks and weeks and weeks. Most of us in first world countries have got a fat reserve that would keep us going if we had no access to food for weeks, many, many weeks. So when people start talking about fasting, say, oh, that's dangerous, you've got to eat regularly, it's bad for you not to have food. That's absolute nonsense. And we've all got a ready supply of energy. Problem is, when we're eating sugar a lot, our body kind of forgets how to use fat as energy. And it takes a little while, if you're not regularly fasting, for the body to learn how to access fat for energy rather than just sugar. But it will do it. But it's good if you fast regularly, because your body then becomes much more of a fat burner and understands quickly how to access that energy. But I think the easiest way to remember it, I didn't come up with this idea, somebody else had this lovely idea of the fridge and the freezer. So you've got your emergency supply in your fridge, which is your liver, and then all around our bodies we've got these fat stores, which is really like the freezer. It takes a bit longer for the body to get hold of that and use it, but it's there and it will keep you going. So I'm sure you've all heard about the basal metabolic rate, which is the sort of tick over amount of energy that our body needs. So even if we just went to bed, and then when we got up from bed in the morning, we just went and sat in a chair. So for 24 hours, we're doing virtually nothing in the way of exercise. We still have a basic requirement of energy. And how we use that energy is slightly variable from person to person. And we talk about this as your basal metabolic rate. So it's just the amount of energy that's required to keep us going at rest. And I say some people have got a naturally more efficient basal metabolic rate than others, and they're the lucky people that seem to be able to eat everything and never put on weight. However, as we've mentioned before, if they're eating badly, just because somebody's skinny doesn't mean that they are actually healthy. But we can, I think a lot of people think that you're either lucky or unlucky, and that your basal metabolic rate can't be altered. But actually it can, and in an individual it can vary a lot, depending on what you're eating, how much you're exercising, the climate, and all sorts of different things. But the most important influence on your basal metabolic rate is insulin. And that's why what you're eating and the demand by your body for insulin really can affect your basal metabolic rate. So it all comes back, as every week, whatever topic I'm talking about, all comes back to how good your nutrition is. And are we eating the right foods that our body needs to fuel it? So, as I say, we should cycle in and out of the fed and the fasted state. And in the fed state, the body wants to store the energy we're consuming, because in nature, not modern 21st century life, but back in the day when we didn't have such easy access to food, when the body's receiving food, it's expecting then to go through a period without food. So it's designed to store the food as fat. So when we're in the fed state, our basal metabolic rate is all geared up to digesting and converting that food into energy. That it will, some of it will be used immediately, but a lot of it will be stored for energy for the periods when we don't have any food. So if we keep elevating insulin by eating and keeping it high because we're eating all the time, then the body's persistently in a fed state, and it's not meant to be in this state. So it's confused and it can't access the stored energy. So you're eating and eating and eating and just putting on more and more fat, and you're not using any of that fat for energy, because the supply is way more than the demand. And our metabolism therefore slows down, because eventually it kind of realizes, oh my goodness, there's more coming in than we need. I don't need to work so hard. Whereas if you have long periods without food, then the metabolic rate will increase, because insulin levels will drop, and other hormones that are important as part of this metabolic process, noradrenaline, growth hormone, and cortisol, will increase, and they all help your body to use that energy that you've stored. So as you can see, we should be cycling in and out of these two states, and if we do so, then our body will work much more efficiently than if we just keep feeding and feeding and feeding and never give the body a rest. So Jason Fung, Dr. Jason Fung, is a Canadian physician who is probably one of the sort of most world-renowned experts on fasting. And he points out, when, you know, a lot of people in modern life think it's dangerous to fast and we shouldn't be messing around with, you know, long periods of starvation, as folks sometimes refer to it, that this is nothing new, and that fasting has been used for thousands of years. And during which time obesity has been no more than a passing footnote in the pantheon of human illness. It's a nice quote, that. But, you know, obesity is a modern phenomenon. Very, very rare in history do you come across people who were morbidly obese in the way that we now have a huge proportion of our population, because it's really only been since the second half of the 20th century, and really the last 4 decades, when food has been not only plentiful, but also more refined and processed, and the whole snack industry and fast food industry has developed, that we have had such huge problems with obesity and all the other chronic diseases that come from eating either too much or the wrong kinds of food. Fasting is not new, and fasting has been part of human life since man first walked the earth. So I hope I've convinced you that fasting, and you probably don't need convincing, as I say, because many of you are used to fasting in your lives, but it's not new, it's very healthy, and in fact it's extremely important as part of our lifestyle. So I know I'm speaking to people who probably are used to fasting, but maybe because of some of the things I've gleaned about the types of fasting you do, it's worth thinking about what I'm referring to, which may be very slightly different. And I think it's really, really important, if you do eat a fairly high carbohydrate diet and you are used to eating frequently, that before you really attempt to do a proper fast, which is really depriving yourself of food for a certain period of time, fluid is always going to be important. We'll talk about what kinds of fluid in a minute. But if you are in the habit of snacking frequently, you will find it extremely difficult to do a fast. So the first thing you need to do before you're likely to fast is to try and get yourself onto a good pattern of just eating your main meals, 3 meals with a good window between each one. Even better, just 2 meals a day. And that way you're already having a fairly extended fast overnight, and then a reasonably decent gap between meals, which again is a kind of fast. So most people who have never dealt with fasting before will find the easiest way to get into it is to start pushing breakfast back. And I think we have discussed this in this group before. So breakfast simply means breaking your fast. So you can break your fast any time of the day. It doesn't have to be at 8 o'clock in the morning. It could be at midday. It could be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It could even be 6 p.m. So a lot of people find that if they've been used to having breakfast at 8 and they start trying to push it back to 10 o'clock, then 11, and then 12, and they're gradually getting themselves, depending on what time they've eaten their evening meal the night before, and assuming they're not having a snack before bed, they're quickly getting themselves into maybe a 16 or 18-hour fast. And that in itself can be very beneficial to the body. And a lot of people do no more than that. And that's what we sort of call intermittent fasting, or, oh, brain's gone. There are various different ways of describing that, which I'll come back to. But that's still a fast. And the important thing is to have a really nutritious meal, a meal that contains a reasonable amount of protein, small amount of healthy fat, and hopefully very little in the way of carbohydrates, that will keep your body satisfied during that period that you're then going without food. It is important to hydrate, but you want to make sure the drinks you're having don't contain carbohydrates, or indeed much in the way of fat, so that they're not going to break your fast. But a lot of people start with that extended window of between meals, and are soon able to do a whole 24-hour fast where they eat one evening and then they don't eat again till the following evening. And that is very beneficial for many, many people. And once you get into a routine of doing that, it then starts to become easier to push it to a 36-hour fast, 48-hour fast. There's absolutely no rules about what a safe level of fasting is once you've got used to it, but we'd never ever encourage people to do to rapidly go from eating frequently to an extended fast without working their way towards it. And it's really important, and this is what I think maybe a lot of you need to contemplate when you're thinking about your religious fasts, is what you eat before and after a fast, because in order to help your body to get the most out of it, it is important that there is a nutritious meal prior to the fast and another highly nutritious meal at the end of the fast. Fruit, as Panna mentioned, we probably wouldn't recommend too much fruit, because fruit, as we've mentioned before, does contain natural sugars, and natural sugars will cause an insulin spike. And when you get an insulin spike, that will be followed by an insulin drop, and that will often make you hungry. So fruit can make it difficult to fast. You're better probably thinking about drinks, good stocks. I mean, if you're vegetarian, you won't want to be drinking bone broth, but a good vegetable stock, something that's clear and isn't containing carbohydrates. So teas, preferably without milk. A little bit of coffee is okay if you're not too caffeine sensitive, and good old-fashioned water. But you do need to have a bit of salt if you're fasting for 24 hours or more. You really do need to be paying attention to making sure you're getting some salt during the day as well. But that's sort of a little ease into fasting for those that might not have done it before. Now, obviously, I appreciate quite a few of you that join the group are either pre-diabetic or diabetic, and it is important to reassure you that fasting in type 2 diabetes is perfectly safe. In fact, many GPs that are getting more knowledgeable about all of this will even guide type 1 diabetics through a fast, and type 1 diabetics can fast safely, but that's another story for a different time. But for type 2 diabetes, indeed, if we look back to treatment of type 2 diabetes before we had the drugs that are available now, fasting was one of the first things they did, because once they started to recognize that it was sugar that was causing the problem, one of the ways that they would address this is to simply remove any kind of carbohydrates, but also put people on fasting type programs so that they had long periods without food to help regulate. Even before they fully understood about insulin, they kind of understood that there was something odd going on with sugar, and they started experimenting with fasting. So there are records right back in the early 20th century showing people with type 2 diabetes being encouraged to fast. When you fast, as I've mentioned before, when you eat any kind of food that contains carbohydrates, the sugar that's broken down will go to the cells, and some of it will go to the liver and be converted into glycogen as an emergency fat store. Problems arise when there's far too much sugar and the liver gets overburdened with sugar that then gets converted to fat, and also when the cells get overburdened with sugar, the sugar has to be sent around the body and, as I say, generally gets stored as fat. It's also quite toxic, so too much sugar is never a good thing. But we have this glycogen supply in the liver, and obviously when you're fasting, that gets used up, and that's not a bad thing, because it's good to have a turnover and it helps the liver to detoxify. Our liver is all our organs are important, and obviously the brain is probably the most important along with the heart, but the liver is an incredibly important organ in terms of the huge number of different jobs it does, and every drop of blood in your body passes through your liver once every hour, and it's being cleaned as it goes through the liver, as well as nutrients being removed and various other things are going on. Liver is incredibly important, and it's the most important thing for detoxifying the blood from the end result of metabolism. And when it gets overburdened with trying to deal with far too much sugar, this can help to put it into trouble, and it gets a buildup of toxins. So fasting really helps the liver, both by using up some of the stored glycogen and body fat, the fat that's stored in the liver as well as the body fat. This really helps it to clean itself up. We also know that the gut benefits hugely from periods of fasting, and it gets a chance to repair and generally become more healthy. So for diabetics that I'm just starting to learn even more, the more I investigate this, the more I realize I need to know. And there's all sorts of other amazing things that go on in our gut that all work together. And as I say, we realize now that when the gut is being bombarded constantly with food, whether you're diabetic or not, it's not able to do its job properly. So fasting helps everybody, but particularly people with type 2 diabetes, where we've already got a bit of a problem with metabolism. If we can help the metabolism to reset itself, it really does benefit in type 2 diabetes. So it is important, if you're on medication for your diabetes, that you do discuss your medication and fasting with your healthcare professionals, because depending on which drug you're on, it may be that if you know you're going to fast, they will tell you when to take your medication. Because if you're going to have a long period without food, then it might be better that you wait until you're going to eat again before you take some of the medications. Metformin is reasonably stable and it's less problematic, but if you're on any of the more complex diabetes medications, and particularly if you're on insulin, then you really do need to take professional advice. It's not that it can't happen, but you need to understand how you would fit in your medication with your food pattern. And also it's really useful to monitor your blood sugar, not just to make sure you don't miss a hypo or try and avoid a hypo, but actually it can be very, very educational to see what happens when you fast and how your blood sugar behaves. And also then when you're reintroducing food, which foods cause the biggest spikes. You can learn an awful lot about how your body responds to food by regular monitoring of your blood sugar. So as I say, hydrating while you're fasting is incredibly important. Obviously water is not a problem at all. All types of tea, providing they're not accompanied by milk, will be fine. Coffee is okay. Most of us that are caffeine sensitive need to drink our coffee in the morning rather than usually after midday. We recommend you ease off the highly caffeinated drinks. Bone broth, if you're not vegetarian, is very nutritious and actually can help with hunger pangs because it kind of tastes a bit more like food. But obviously, if you're vegetarian, you might want to try and find a good vegetable stock that maybe would fill the same need. Some of the yeast-based drinks that you can get might fulfill that need, as long as there's no obvious carbohydrate in it, and preferably minimal fat so that it's not affecting the fasted state. Then whatever fluid keeps you happy, and having a good drink if you're feeling hungry can help to sort of get away from those horrible hunger pangs. The interesting thing about fasting is that you may start to feel hungry, and some of you who have done fairly long religious fasts will probably have found this, that the hunger doesn't get worse and worse and worse. You may start to feel hungry once your last meal has been thoroughly digested, but it doesn't sort of escalate, and drinks can help to keep it under control as well. So most people, if they're patient with themselves, find that they can tolerate that feeling of being empty, and in fact eventually get very used to it. So Jason Fung, I say, who's a bit of a guru of fasting, suggests that if people really can't bear coffee without any kind of milk or cream, that maybe 1 to 2 teaspoons of cream won't break a fast in a significant way, or coconut oil, which if you put coconut oil into coffee, you need to sort of blitz it with a hand blender so that it disperses and doesn't just sit there like an oily mess. But that can actually make coffee taste quite nice and can help to offset some of the hunger pangs. But we're not talking about the quantities. If you've ever heard of bulletproof coffee, where people put a great big dollop of coconut oil and maybe a lump of butter into a coffee and blitz it, that's a whole different ball game, and we certainly wouldn't recommend that while you're fasting. But 1 to 2 teaspoons of coconut oil whisked into coffee can make it a bit more palatable and, as I say, ease the hunger pangs without, as long as it's just 1 cup, without completely ruining the effect of the fast. The other thing that can be useful for drinks to make them a bit more interesting are spices such as cinnamon or nutmeg. We would highly recommend that you do not use artificial sweeteners. So if you don't like your tea or coffee without sugar in, then don't drink them when you're trying to fast, because any kind of sweetener kids the body into thinking you've had sugar and can cause a bit of an insulin spike. The brain senses the sweetness, and even though it's not actually sugar, the signals go to the pancreas and you can get insulin being produced, and that again will ruin the effect of the fast. A little bit of salt, preferably sea salt, used in the bone broth or the vegetable stock or whatever, is useful if you're fasting for 24 hours or more. You really need to make sure your salt is being replenished. So types of fasts, as I mentioned, intermittent fasting can start with that simply 12 hours. If you have your evening meal at 7 p.m. and you don't have your breakfast till at least 7 a.m., you've done a 12-hour fast. And most of us are doing that regularly anyway. The important thing is not to have those bedtime snacks and bedtime milky drinks, because that's spoiling that effect. So most of us can start to push back breakfast and end up building up to maybe even a 20 or 24-hour fast. And then 1 meal a day is the 24-hour fast. And a lot of people literally live like that all the time. They have got themselves into a nice regime where they are more than happy just to eat once a day, one really good, highly nutritious meal, either at lunchtime or early evening. Something else that you've probably all heard about is the 5-2 sort of approach, where you eat normally, but by normally we don't mean excessively or with lots of carbohydrate and stuff, but eat good meals on 5 days a week, either 3 meals or 2 meals a day, whatever suits you. And then on 2 days, you reduce your energy intake significantly. So it's not fasting completely, but it's having either 1 or 2 meals, but the totaling only 800 calories for that day. When Michael Mosley, who's the TV doctor, if you like, who really pioneered this diet, first kind of discovered the science behind it, he thought you needed to drop down to 500 calories a day. But in fact, he's done further work and research and realizes that the effect is still very good if you just have 800 calories on those fasting days. Now, normally in our low carb, real food world, we don't like counting calories, but if you're going to do the 5-2 approach, you need to keep an eye on that so that you can make sure on those 2 days, your energy intake is under control. And he has got several books out now with ideas about recipes, etc., that you can use to create 800 calorie meals or 2 400 calorie meals or whatever. And that's very successful. A lot of people find that if they get into a pattern of doing this regularly, where 2 days a week they're keeping their energy content down to 800 calories, that they lose weight and they feel a lot better. And it can help with diabetes control as well. So that's another approach. And taking it a step further, some people find that they can actually do this every other day. So they have 1 day of eating fairly normally and another day of real limitation of energy input. If you get used to doing 24-hour fasts, then it's not a big step to take where 1 day you simply don't eat at all. So you might eat in the evening on day 1, have nothing on day 2, and then break your fast in the morning of the 3rd day. And then I think when people get that far, then they often find that they can start thinking about maybe doing a 48-hour fast. A lot of people who really find fasting helpful and beneficial, and they get used to it, go on then to extend to maybe 5 days of fasting. And all of the people who report on doing this, and by fasting, I really do mean fasting, they're literally having nothing but fluids for those 5 days. So it's not like some of your religious fasting where you do eat at the end of the day. This is really depriving yourself of anything other than fluids for those days. But they do report huge benefits, both in how they feel and their weight loss and their diabetes control. So it's not for everybody, but it certainly is something that's out there that people are regularly doing nowadays, and that do seem to be very beneficial. And before people start screaming and shouting, that's not healthy, this is how early man lived. Early man never knew when he was going to get his next food. So he really would have a feast when he did get food, and then he could go for days and days and days before he got his next meal. And the human body is geared up to deal with this. It's modern life and modern food marketing that has led us to the belief that we have to eat frequently. It's not the way the body's actually meant to work. So extended fasting is safe, but what's most important is that you are starting and finishing the fast with highly nutritious food, by which I mean real food, whole foods, particularly containing good amounts of healthy proteins and fats, so that the body has got that sustainable nutrition going in to help you through the fasting period. And last year there were a team of people who did an 100-mile walk or jog. I mean, some of them walked it, some of them jogged. They did about 25 miles a day on absolutely nothing but water. A mixture of males and females. A couple of them were type 1 diabetics, and they all were able to do that physical endurance and were perfectly healthy at the end of the exercise, literally just on water. So it is doable. It's not for everybody, and you need to work up to it. I would never, ever, as I say, suggest somebody does an extended fast until they've got used to doing the intermittent and the 24 hours, and then work their way towards those longer fasts. But it is healthy and it is good for the body, and it is perfectly possible even with diabetes, as long as you manage it carefully. So tips that people, and some of you may well have plenty of tips as well if you have done sort of 24-hour fasts, but the fluid is important. Keeping busy, boredom is the worst thing, and most of us eat these days excessively when we are bored or worried or anxious. So organising yourself so that life is as stress-free as possible when you're going to attempt to fast is a good idea. Keeping busy, so having plenty of things to do. Coffee, as I mentioned, not only is a good drink to have, but it has got a slight appetite suppressant element, so can help, as can the broths. And as I've said before, the hunger can come in waves, but it's not constant, and it shouldn't get worse and worse and worse. People will tell you that it's unhealthy and it's dangerous and all sorts of other things. So please try and, block out those kind of negative messages. And if you give up, you have to break your fast because you just feel, I can't do it at the moment. Don't beat yourself up. Sometimes it's just not the right time for you. Doesn't mean you can't have a go another time. And as I've said frequently, please make sure you're eating really good, nourishing food before. Do try to avoid the idea of having a binge afterwards. It's often a good idea to have something quite small when you break your fast, and then a bigger meal planned for a bit later on. It's also a good idea to perhaps plan that meal and have it part prepared if you can, so that you're not having to sort of spend time cooking and getting frustrated where you might dive into the fridge or the biscuit tin or somewhere and eat all the wrong things before you've got that nourishing meal ready. And as I say, there are lots of different options if we're not talking about a religious fast. There are lots of different options for you to try. And some people just find that regularly doing that that longer intermittent fasting suits them fine. It helps them to lose weight, helps with diabetes control, and that's all they need to do. They don't have to push themselves to the longer ones. But those that do longer fasts really do find them incredibly beneficial. So it's, you know, something that's there for people to try if they wish. So I think I've probably said what's on there. Don't forget to keep up your fluid intake even when you've started to eat again, because some people are so focused on the food they forget that the fluids are so important. And don't forget, folks, never mind when you're fasting, but sometimes we mistake thirst for hunger and we eat when we really don't need to eat. What would satisfy our body would just be a nice drink. So fluid is incredibly important, and sometimes we don't drink enough of the right kind of fluids in daily life. Probably repeating myself there, but just the last slide is really just showing you that there's a huge amount of information out there. YouTube, as with everything, is a font of information. So Jason Fung and various other people who are experts on fasting have loads of YouTube videos, so you don't have to spend money. But if you do want to look at books about fasting, then on the left, as you're looking at it, Jason Fung's original Complete Guide to Fasting is a very interesting book that helps you to understand the whole process and gives you lots of hints and tips. On the right hand side is a book that he's written in conjunction with a couple of other experts, one of whom is an ordinary individual who just found that their health was transformed by learning about fasting, and therefore it's got the benefit of, you know, the expert patient, if you like, as well as the expert doctor. So that's a very useful book. And then I mentioned Michael Mosley's 8 Fast 800 diet, and there are now a couple of recipe books that his wife, who's a GP, has created with a food writer that support the idea of those 800 calorie days if you're going to do something like the 5-2 approach. You can actually use the 800 calorie a day approach for several weeks if you want to lose weight rapidly, and rapid, safe weight loss, you know, with proper real food is an acknowledged way of quickly helping to lose weight and reverse diabetes. Again, it's not everybody can do it, because not everybody finds that they feel well on only 800 calories a day. And it is really important those 800 calories are made up of healthy food. But it is another approach to managing diabetes. So all of that is discussed in these books. So you can use them either just to support 5-2 dieting, or you can use them as a plan to help you for several weeks get yourself on the road to weight loss and transforming your health. And I believe he's got yet another book coming out around Christmas time with a slightly different approach again, but all based on the same idea of helping people to manage weight and manage diabetes. So there's just a few suggestions, but as I say, if you go onto YouTube and look for Jason Fung or put intermittent fasting into the search box, you will come across lots of useful videos that with people talking about how to tackle fasting from a health point of view. I appreciate it's a slightly different approach necessarily to the religious approach to fasting, but actually I think that one can help the other. So I hope that's been helpful, and maybe we can go on to some questions now. I can see quite a lot gone into the chat box, so if I stop screen sharing, we can have a look at the questions.
So Nit mentioned time restricted eating, which I said, yes, that is right. That's part of the
that's
sort of
intermittent fasting, really.
Yeah. And then she said, when you do 2 meals, then sometimes it leads to eating more in the sort of like at brunch and then at dinner. So that's her observation by the sounds of things.
Yeah, I think that's a danger. And therefore, you know, you've got to find what suits you. And it might be that people who find that they get the munchies once they've eaten, they might be better trying to aim for 1 meal a day. You could have one bigger meal in the day, and hopefully that would satisfy that sort of need. But you'll then get all the benefits, obviously, of of the fast. I find it quite hard to do 2 small meals. If I'm going to do it, I try to do it as 1 meal a day.
Yeah, I can't do 2 small meals. But then I can't do 3 small meals. So I'd rather do the 2 decent sized meals
Yes.
than 3 big meals.
Yeah.
So
I mean, my daily routine is 2 meals a day, but if I want to do, you know, I hit plateaus every now and then. I've just been on holiday, so I've put a little bit of weight on again. So I know to get myself back into weight loss mode, I need to go down to 1 meal a day.
Yeah, I prefer to eat twice a day. But yeah, you're right. Going to 1 meal a day does make that overeating less.
Well, there's a limit to how
likely.
much you can eat in one sitting, isn't there? So you're probably less likely to be able to go mad.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking about pink Himalayan salt. Yeah, that's fine. That's good. That's healthy. Really, what we're saying is don't have table salt. So the other healthier salts are better. Yes, the slides, I know Panna will put the slides on for you at the end.
And then Smita's asking, why do people say have tea without milk? What is the impact of milk?
Milk's got quite a lot of carbs in it, and therefore, as well as fat. I mean, in a normal diet, whole milk is in moderation, can be consumed. Although if you're trying to lose weight or you're watching your carb intake, you do need to keep an eye on how much milk you're drinking. It's quite easy if you have a lot of cups of tea and you have milk in all of those to get through quite a bit of milk in a day. But when you're trying to fast, milk will push you over, you know, out of the fasted state, if you like, quite quickly because of the carbs it contains. So that's why we would recommend that you try and avoid having milk in drinks during a fast.
Yeah, and can I add, generally Indian tea, if made traditionally, it is quite a milky drink.
Yeah.
You know, it's significant amount of milk in there.
You know, on the slide that where I said Jason Fung mentioned that in a coffee, if you really can't have it black, he's talking about 1 to 2 teaspoons, and that is just once in the day. That's not every cup of tea you have, whatever. So you really have to try and find an alternative. You know, I like herbal teas. I like the African red bush tea, things like that. I drink happily without milk. So that's what I would prefer to use when I'm trying to fast, so that I'm not needing to have that milk or cream or whatever.
Right, we've got a question that's saying, what are good vegetarian protein items that are allowed? Now, it's a special fast called Ogyeros. So I think we need to find out what they would ordinarily eat.
Yes.
So Veena, would you be able to just tell us what you would eat when you do your Ogyeros fast? Is it possible to unmute yourself?
While we're just waiting for them to identify, I just spotted there's a question above that one about, can fasting ever produce adverse effects, and when should one stop fasting before it damages the body? I don't think fasting would damage the body in itself. As I said, you know, the body is designed to be able to cope and metabolize its own fat for energy. If you're diabetic and you're taking drugs that naturally reduce your blood sugar, and you're not taking on board food, and you keep taking the drugs, that could put you into a hypoglycemic episode, which wouldn't be good for you. And so that's why I said, if you are taking those kind of drugs, it's really important to talk to your doctors and find out how you take your drugs, depending on when you intend to eat. It might be that you miss the drugs for a day, because the drugs are there to help you metabolize the sugar. And if you're not having anything, then there's nothing for it to metabolize. So, but you need to speak to your doctor about that. But fasting in itself is not dangerous. So it is important that you're well nourished before you fast. Obviously, people who are starving, who are deprived of food for a long period of time and they're malnourished anyway, that's a whole different thing. We are talking here about people who are well nourished, not having food for a period of time, and that is totally different to starvation. So I hope that clarifies that.
So going back to that special Ogeros fast,
Yeah.
Bean has put in the chat potatoes, nuts, fruits, and Nit has put in matoki, which is like little sort of green bananas that are meant to stay green to cook with.
So
Again,
can I just sort of get my head round the rationale for this fast is what, to deprive yourself of certain foods?
Yeah, you can
as
only
opposed
have
to
things.
all food.
Yeah.
certain foods.
Yeah.
It's more steamed or boiled food you can have. Like, it's only carbs. Carbs is the only thing you can have.
Well, then what can I say? You know, there are. I mean, nuts contain some carbs. So, are you allowed any nuts?
Yes, they're allowed nuts.
Right. Well, nuts are probably nature's best source of vegetarian protein with carbs, because unfortunately the thing that's difficult for vegetarians and particularly vegans to get their protein is most of the plant-based sources of protein come with carbs as well. So if you've got a choice, then I'd be leaving out the potatoes and having more nuts, because at least you're getting better nutrition from the nuts than you would be from the potatoes. So if you can add a bit more there, Dacha, if you understand a bit better than me what foods they can have.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot of starchy vegetables that they eat. And I'm just curious, are you allowed things like cauliflower and broccoli?
No.
If not, why not?
No, because I think that's grown on the top. You can only eat the things that's grown underneath the
Well, then
ground.
why can you eat? Sorry for being. Go on.
Potatoes, sweet potatoes, cassava,
So
things that you can eat that.
So then, why matoki? That's
Matoki,
overground.
no, it's as a fruit. Fruit is allowed.
Oh, okay. So underground vegetables, or fruit and nuts.
Yeah, not all fruit. Not all vegetables you're allowed to eat, only like cassava, potatoes, and sweet potatoes, and, things like that. But no.
But yeah, you are allowed nuts.
You're allowed any types of nuts, yeah.
Okay, well, I would go for the nuts then and try and leave out all those starchy vegetables, because particularly if you're battling with weight, but also you're diabetic, because all those starchy vegetables are just going to give you insulin spikes, as will fruit.
Yeah.
So the nuts are probably the healthiest thing you can eat there. And obviously, is this the one that, how long does this one go on for? Is this the 9-day one?
No, Ageras is every fortnight.
So is it one day?
One day, just one day every fortnight.
Okay. Well, if it's just about depriving yourself of most food, I'd try and get yourself trained to do a 24-hour fast. And certainly avoid all those starchy things and just have some nuts on hand for if you really, really need to have something to eat. Because you're undoing, if you're going to be trying to live the good low carb lifestyle either side of it, then you're undoing all that good work by having a day of starchy veg.
Some people, I've just read, some people do eat bitter gourd and carrots. I mean, I don't think we're allowed to eat that, but according to this, some of them are eating. So something I not know.
I mean, I suppose it's like so many of these things that may come from an ancient source that they've kind of got a little bit tweaked along the way with personal interpretations. But yeah, I think if it's just one day, I would try and turn it into a nice, healthy 24-hour fast and really do without those starchy veg, because it's not helping, and if all the good work you're putting in around it, it's really going to undo.
Yeah, because I think when you fast, portion control with these foods is very difficult, because it will drive hunger. It will make you really, like, once those foods are digested, you're going to hit you're going to have a sugar spike, and then you're going to have the insulin release, and then you're going to feel really hungry again quite quickly.
Yeah, it won't help you with the fasting.
Yeah, it makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah, it's really, as I say, and I'd certainly try and make sure you have a really low carb, nice protein orientated meal the day before to help your body see you through, and lots of fluids. Semi-skim milk's no better from a carbohydrate point of view. It's got 2% less fat than whole milk, but its carb content's the same, so it's no better, I'm afraid. Much better if you're going to drink milk, much better to drink the full fat version.
Full fat, yes.
But you just need to watch that, because it's 4%. Well, there's 4 grams of sugar per 100 mils. Is that right?
I think so.
I think that's about a teaspoon of sugar per 100 mils. And you think, oh, I don't drink that much milk, but actually it's quite interesting. I tell people to measure out their milk into, 100 mils, put a little 100 ml pot in the fridge and have your tea, and see what time in the day you've got through your 100 mils. Because I think most people are very surprised that even though they say, oh, I have a bit of my tea, they're drinking an awful lot more than they realise. So that's why we say to watch milk, particularly if you're trying to watch your carbs.
What is sago made out of?
It's a grain. It's a bit, is it in the rice family? We used to call it tapioca, yeah.
Tapioca, because
they
call
it frog spawn.
I'm surprised why they're allowed to eat that.
That's starchy as well.
It is, yeah.
It's all in that family of.
Can I ask, because obviously I know you are all far more knowledgeable about our culture than I feel I am. So what is the reason for doing this fast, and why these foods, sort of like, where did this fast originate from? I have my ideas, if you don't mind me sharing. I think this fast originated way back when women really didn't get much food.
Yeah.
They'd be married, everybody in the family would eat before them, and they would just get scraps. And I feel this was a way to make sure they had energy dense food once a fortnight, like you said. So I feel when this fast was first came about, it had a purpose, but I'm not sure it has the same purpose now in our modern society where we are overfed and undernourished. Because the energy is there, but the nourishment is only to a point.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering.
I think this came up just to give your body a rest from food. Stop eating one day. It's just to, dehydrate yourself and clear your body.
As I say, the logic, because to me it sounds like it belongs in a culture where you're not having that much.
Yeah.
And therefore the fact that it's very starchy veg doesn't matter so much, because as we've said before, your ancestors that lived in the subcontinent, who ate a lot of rice and stuff, they weren't having all the other, the quality of the rice and the grains they ate was probably very different to what we get now, but they weren't having all this other stuff. And this fast sounds to me like it's come from that sort of era where they were probably generally underfed. And so having a day of starchy stuff wasn't going to have such an adverse effect as it would now.
I think to be honest, in olden days, this fasting came up by not eating anything. That was to give your body a rest from complete food. This is the modern society that created that, we can eat this and we can eat that.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
that would make more sense.
Yeah. Otherwise,
so really, as I said, our ancestors, no matter which culture you come from, because I mean, in the Christian religion, we have Lent when we're supposed to deprive ourselves of a lot more than just a chocolate bar, which unfortunately it is these days. But, all of these religious fasts, they didn't understand the workings of the human body in the same way we do now. And yet they had a better gut, pardon the pun, but gut instinct for what was good for the body. And I think fasting came from that.
Yeah.
As well. And also fasting was part of life because, as I say, food supply wasn't anything like as reliable as it is now, and therefore they often had unintended fasts. So that would make more sense, because to me, having a day where you just eat starchy stuff in modern life doesn't make any sense at all.
It doesn't. Nowadays, in this modern life, people go out of their way saying, oh, it's agueras, so let's make this and let's make that.
Yeah.
And they make 50 odd dishes.
Turning into a food fest.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, why the hell are you fasting?
Yeah. So
it doesn't win.
Yeah.
It doesn't
So
win.
I would say try and, it's not a bad discipline to have once a fortnight. It fits very much into what I've just been talking about, but try and make it a proper fast. And
yes, I want to do that by not eating anything.
Yeah.
And if I'm hungry, I'll have more liquid than proper meal. And if I am hungry, I'll be happy with one jacket potato and that's it.
Okay, well, I would prefer no jacket potato and a handful of nuts, but so be it.
Yeah, a handful of nuts and a few berries would be far more.
Yeah, we won't fall out about it though. Yeah. But somebody else is asking, have we fasted or have I fasted? Yes, I try the 24-hour. I have done a 36-hour, but I have to say my life has just been such in the last couple of years that trying to get any longer than that just never has worked. But I regularly do the time restricted eating, and probably quite frequently do a 20-hour, and then when I can get my life organized enough, 1 meal a day is the way I try to be. But I know plenty of people who regularly do 3-day and 5-day fasts, and they eat the sort of healthy food we've been talking about through all of these group meetings the rest of the time, but then they just aim for a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 days when they literally only drink fluids. And most of them report incredibly positive results, not only in weight loss and improvement in diabetes, but in energy levels, their skin, their mind clarity, lots and lots of different physiological effects. It's not just about the gut and digestion. There's all sorts of things that improve. And, because the bottom line is most of us are eating far, far too much. The human being, the idea of 3 meals a day is a very modern concept. I think if you looked at proper Victorian records in the UK, and I'm quite sure if you look at your own cultural ancestry, most of them will not have had the luxury of 3 meals a day.
No.
I know my mother, who grew up in Ireland, she went to school having had a bit of breakfast. She didn't get school dinners. So she didn't eat again until she came home in the evening, and she walked 5 miles each way. And existed on those 2 miles. She grew up healthy. She'll be 90 next year, so it didn't do her any harm. My father was the same, and he's 98. They grew up in an era when food was just not plentiful the way it is now. They got decent food because they both grew up in farming communities, but they were not eating the sort of quantities that we eat today, and that particularly children eat today. And they certainly weren't getting the sugar that children get today. So I think we've kind of got to really pull ourselves back to realizing that the human body does not need anything like the amount of fuel that we are giving it on a regular basis. And fasting is quite a neat way of helping us to sort of redress the balance and start to understand what proper hunger feels like as well. Because, a lot of us say, oh, I'm hungry. We're not really hungry. And we eat because it's a certain time of day, not because we actually really need to eat. And fasting kind of helps you to learn to listen to your body and understand what real hunger feels like. And maybe be a bit more tuned in to the signals about when we should eat and when we really don't need to eat. So it's got all sorts of benefits, not just the basic nutritional ones.
It's funny how I know for a fact I fast every fortnight. I know it's a Agaris, so I'm fasting. Automatically, my mind is adjusted to it. I'm not hungry today.
Mm.
I'm hungry. But
Mm.
as soon as I get up in the next morning, my mind is saying I'm hungry because
Yeah.
I'm not fasting anymore. Automatically,
And you know you can eat. Yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, we are bombarded. It's probably harder to fast nowadays than it ever was, because you're bombarded everywhere you go with food. I mean, that's why planning and trying to fast on days when maybe you haven't got to go out, because, you know, if you're in the supermarket queue, if you're filling your car up with petrol, everywhere you go, there's food and snacks and things in front of you. So if you are trying to be, you know, to deprive yourself of food for that day, it makes it really hard. Turn on the television and blinking adverts are pushing food at you, and it's all the wrong kind of food as well. But it doesn't help. So you really do have to get your mind in the right place.
Yes, I do believe that. I think we must adjust our minds, train our brains to say fasting.
Yeah.
Because the whole month of August I fasted, and I didn't feel hungry at all then. But one particular day I fast, and the very next day, automatically my mind is thinking that you're not fasting, your stomach is calling for food.
Yeah.
But I think we have to train our brains that you are fasting, and that's the way we can start controlling our diet.
An awful lot of why we eat in modern society is to do with feelings and emotions and things. It's not true hunger, and it's, you know, all sorts of different things are going on. So if you managed to spot any,
we've got fruit, dried fruit question. Well, is a dried prunes okay? And then there's another one that says, does dates contain a lot of sugar?
Unfortunately,
a lot of sugar. Yes.
All dried fruits are worse than fresh fruits because they're concentrated sugar. So no, again, when you're fasting, and indeed if you're diabetic, those are things you should be very wary of all the time, but certainly not when you're fasting. They will give you a sugar spike.
Yeah, one date, I'm sure sometimes, depending on the size, can be between 1 teaspoon and 1.5 teaspoons of sugar.
Yeah.
And
the trouble is you can't usually eat just one of those things.
Yes, exactly. You can't. It's really difficult.
So you can very, very quickly have consumed a huge amount of sugar. Sweet potatoes, I'm afraid, are no better than white potatoes. And then they've possibly got marginally more nutrition in them, but as far as starch and spiking your blood sugar, they're just as bad.
Yeah, because it's about diabetes, remember? So that's the key focus here. You know, it's not just nutrition, because you can get the same nutrition you can get in a sweet potato, but in something that's less carby.
Yeah,
that's going to be, you know, helping you reverse your diabetes. Paneer, I saw something about paneer. Hang on, where is it? Some people eat cheese too, apparently, when they fast.
Yeah.
But,
as I say, we have to kind of distinguish between the kind of fasting I'm talking about, which is fasting for nutritional reasons rather than religious fast, because in religious fast there's all sorts of little variations, as we've been talking about. And you know, with Ramadan, they can't eat between sunrise and sunset, but then they can have as much as they want. So that's not really, it's the discipline, particularly in the summertime when you've got a very long period that you can't eat. That is good, but you still need to be thoughtful about what you eat at either end if you're going to get the most nutritional benefit, and particularly if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic. You can't just suddenly go mad on all the starchy stuff because you've not had food all day. So I think, you know, the point is, if you are fasting, you're fasting, and therefore you're not having anything that's spiking your blood sugar or giving you significant calories. Don't like talking about calories most of the time, but it's energy. So anything that will take your body out of the fasted state would not be a good idea, because then you're not going to get the benefits of fasting, because you're asking your body to work again to digest and process that food. Does that make a bit more sense?
Mm.
So that's why we're talking about just fluids, and preferably fluids that don't contain carbohydrates or significant amounts of fat. Otherwise, you're breaking the fast and stopping the benefits of the fast from having their full effect.
Yeah.
We've got a question. Are sweet potatoes better than potatoes? And if so, why?
Well, I think I just answered that really, but again, no. As I say, they may have marginally more nutritional, I honestly don't know, I need to look this up, but I think there's a bit more fibre in them. And because they're the colour, there may be some beta carotene, which is beneficial, but in terms of starchiness, they are no better, I'm afraid.
And then somebody, Rashmi's asked, can you give a list of protein foods that are good? Obviously, I'm assuming vegetarian proteins.
Yeah, you're not, hopefully not talking about fasting here, because obviously when you're fasting, you're not eating anything. But vegetarians do struggle with protein, and nuts, as we've mentioned, are quite a good source. Nuts and seeds are both a good source of vegetarian protein. However, they all come with carbs. So you need to look at the nutritional value of the different ones and try, particularly if you're diabetic or you're trying to lose weight, to try and get the ones that have the least amount of carbs in them. So nuts wise, cashews, almonds, hazelnuts, they're some of the better lower carb nuts. Brazil nuts, quite good. The same with pulses. Pulses are a really good source of protein. However, they have got quite a lot of carbs in them. So it's using them to, in small quantities to boost your protein intake, but not going mad with them. Soy products like tofu and tempeh are a very good source of protein for vegetarians.
And that's fermented soy.
Yeah, fermented soy. We don't particularly like
normal
a
soy.
lot of the other soy products, but fermented soy such as tofu and tempeh are okay. Something else came into my head, then it's gone again. If you're vegetarian but not vegan, then obviously eggs and the dairy products are again a good source of protein. For vegans, it really is a struggle, and you are dependent more on the pulses and nuts and tofu type products. But nutritional yeast that I've mentioned before is a very good source of protein, and the vitamin B, which is really, really important for vegetarians. And you can buy nutritional yeast quite easily now. And I find it's really useful. I chuck it into soups and stews and things like that. It's a bit like a seasoning, really. I buy it, and it sort of comes in a flaked type product. It's got a very slightly cheesy taste, so it works particularly well in soups where cheese might, if you're not vegan, but it is a vegan product, but it gives a kind of cheesy flavour to things. But I chuck it into most soups if there's a reasonable vegetable, strong tasting vegetable in there. It doesn't overpower it, and particularly if I'm using spices and things as well in the soups or stews. So that can be a useful way of adding a bit of protein to your meals. Anything else that you can think of, Dacho? But it is an ongoing struggle for vegans to get adequate protein.
No, I think you've covered all the key ones that are low in carbohydrates. And then in the past, I think we've mentioned well, you said lentils and dals and pulses and things, but padding them out with more of the vegetables, which obviously,
the less starchy vegetables.
The less starchy vegetables.
Cauliflower and aubergines and butternut squash, things like that.
So can't stress that enough, just to keep the carbohydrates to a minimum. So no, I think you've covered that.
I've just spotted a question there, say, can fasting help IBS? And I do believe it can. Again, with IBS, it's a matter of a bit of trial and error of finding out which foods trigger. And unfortunately, again, for vegetarians, it can be a lot of the vegetables that can be hard for people with IBS to digest. So you have to do your own bit of working out which vegetables trigger you more. But anything that gives the gut a rest is good. So fasting can definitely help, because it gives the gut more time to properly digest the food that you have eaten before it has to deal with more, and therefore it's got more time for repair. And so if you can find the right foods to eat, but also have bigger gaps between the meals, that really does help the gut, helps the microbiome as well.
A kind of good way to see the gut is if you think of the motorway, and you know how the motorways end up with potholes. Well, if the cars continue to drive and we never close the motorway, the motorway would never be able to be repaired.
Yeah.
So fasting, if you think of it as that your motorway and you're stopping eating, so all the necessary work that needs in the repair and rest can take place. That usually helps people to see the benefits of fasting.
And I think also think about the motorway when you get those volume of traffic jams. So there's not been an accident or anything, but you've just got so many cars on the road. If one car 2 miles up the road brakes, it causes this sort of knock-on effect all the way back. So if you're constantly eating, your gut's a bit like that overcrowded motorway. And again, that doesn't do the road surface or anything any good. The gut just doesn't get that chance to repair. So it really is important that we go back to eating the way nature intended us to, which is not only eating whole real foods, but eating them with big intervals in between, so that we can deal with the last meal before the next one comes along. Sorry,
Carolyn, did you give a name for a tofu?
No, I said tofu or tempeh.
Tempeh, that's what I thought. You hadn't given a specific name.
They're slightly different, aren't they? Tempeh's more of a what do you call it? Fermented.
Yeah. And also there are different kinds of tofu. Now I only know this because my mum uses it. We've had some that's not in the fridge, that's not very firm in the supermarkets, but the one that I sell in the fridge in the supermarkets is much firmer. So I think the firmer version is more preferable because it holds its structure a little bit more.
My recollection is there's like silken tofu, which sometimes comes in a pack, and that's more jelly-like or soft.
Yeah.
And then there's the firm one, which you can cut into cubes and season and stir fry and all sorts of things. So, again, it's something that if you haven't used it much, you need to sort of trial and error.
Ranju's saying she's got her blood report and her sugar level is 3.9, not diabetic. Is that level okay?
That is brilliant.
Yeah, I was going to say, if that's, I presume you mean your blood sugar, whether that's fasting or not fasting, that's a good blood sugar.
That's good, yeah. Excellent.
You're only meant to have a maximum of 1 teaspoon, which is between 4 and 5 grams of sugar in your blood at any one time. Obviously, if you've got too little, that's when you feel a bit wobbly and hypo. But 3.9 is pretty spot on. Dandelion tea, somebody's asking, that's fine.
So Shobna's asked, so besides nuts, what's the other best food we should consume? I think we've more or less kind of covered that.
I think we've covered it all.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
We've covered it all now. That's all.
Let me just, somebody was asking for the website I mentioned earlier that...
yes, that's right.
The website is called ATP Science. Now, I have to tell you that these podcasts are often an hour and a half long. They are all functional medicine practitioners who are speaking on them. So they really know what they're talking about. But I listened to a couple of them today, and I have to say I will have to go back and listen again. And also they do a draft of the conversations printed out. What do you call that? There's a word
Oh,
for
a
it.
transcript.
Transcript. Thank you. Brain's gone.
It's okay.
Yeah, there are transcripts, which again, I will find out need. So, but I mean, and I know Dutch will be the same. We're pretty clued up on this, we think. But even for me, I found them very technical, and I'll have to listen to them a couple of times, but they are absolutely fascinating. And there's hundreds of podcasts on this website. So it does tell you when you scroll through them what sort of topic is on each one. So you may find one. I've listened to the one today on fasting and one about bile, which is utterly fascinating. But I'm into this. I'm a bit of an anorak when it comes to nutrition, and I sort of want to know more. So they're not for the faint-hearted, but I will just put the link in here now.
While you do that, can I just address what Nid has said? I assume this is there's nothing much left in foods to eat.
There's loads of food to eat. All the vegetables that grow above the ground. Say nuts and seeds and pulses. If you're vegetarian, indeed if you're vegan, you've still got all the nuts and seeds and pulses and things like that to eat. For those that are vegetarian, you've got eggs and dairy, as well as all the vegetables. And we're not telling you never to eat the vegetables that grow below ground, but if you are trying to lose weight, and most importantly, if you are diabetic, you need to be aware that the root vegetables have got a lot more carbohydrate in them, and therefore you have to be wary of how much you eat. I think somebody did ask earlier about how much carb you should have with each meal. We tend to recommend that low carb is really less than 130 grams of carbs a day. If you want to lose weight, I think personally you really need to drop that down to under 100 grams a day. Some people find that, I certainly find that I don't get anywhere unless I've got it down to 50 grams a day. So I'm better on the protein and leafy veg, and leaving the sort of more carby stuff out completely. But everybody's slightly different. But what we're telling you to eat is real food that nature has provided. Please don't be eating things that have come in a packet. And particularly if you're vegan, watch the marketing, because veganism has become very popular. All the food manufacturers are cottoning onto it. And unfortunately, they don't care about your nutrition. They just want to make money. So if there's a vegan product that comes in a packet, have a look at the ingredients, because it may say plant-based, but it might still be full of all sorts of junk as well. So you can never go too far wrong with what nature provided us with, but be very wary of anything that's come from a factory that's been processed. Look at the ingredients, particularly sugar. They shove sugar in just about everything. So be very, very careful of processed food, whether it's vegan or not. But there is still a lot of really good food out there, but you have to be prepared to make your own. And most of you, I'm sure, do cook at home, and it's just picking good, healthy ingredients to make your food with. And being a bit more aware of where the carb is, and not removing it totally, but trying to keep it to a minimum.
Can I just add that?
Yeah.
When I first changed how I eat, I felt that there was nothing left to eat. It seemed really strange to me that the carbohydrates had to be left out, and it was very difficult to adjust to that. But it is possible, if you try and think of one new vegetable to add to, your day, or even every 2 or 3 days, experiment with just having, like, instead of rice, maybe make an extra dry sort of like side dish of some vegetable. It could be, I mean, we're so lucky as Indians that we have all our Indian vegetables as well as all the Western vegetables, and we have the internet, and we have inspiration from like all these YouTube chefs and people. All you're looking for is over the ground vegetables. They could be frozen, it doesn't matter, and making them at home just means that you're going to cook them in the right type of fat. you know. I mean, people eat rice and chapatis every day traditionally. So why can't we eat maybe binda every couple of days or cabbage every couple of days? Why do we need to alternate them so much, but yet we're all happy to eat? So it's changing our mindset as well, our mind, you know, reframing it and thinking, well, I can eat broccoli every day. I do most days, and cauliflower most days, because I don't eat the rice and the rotli. So it's just, I don't know, just having a new mindset.
Become a bit adventurous. And as I say, YouTube is fantastic now. If you just go onto YouTube and put in the search box vegan low carb food, you'll come across loads and loads of wonderful chefs out there, or not even chefs, they're just people who've had to go low carb for whatever reason, who have experimented and found great recipes. I mean, there are some lovely flatbreads and things out there now made with coconut flour and so forth. I mean, again, if you're vegan, it's a bit more tricky because a lot of them have eggs in them, but there are vegan low carb keto recipes. Don't be afraid to look at keto. Keto just means very low carb. So we're not telling you to go keto, but a keto recipe will be fine to use. And there are quite a few vegan keto people on YouTube who are coming up with some really good recipes for bread alternatives, flatbread alternatives, etc.
Yeah, can I just add, mushrooms are absolutely fantastic food, and the more variety of mushrooms you eat, the better. Just don't just go for the same ones, the same boring ones all the time. Also, if you leave mushrooms in, you know, on your windowsill for a couple of hours before you cook them, then the vitamin D in them increases.
And they are a good source of vitamin D as well, which, you know, for vegans you can struggle with, because some of us get vitamin D from egg yolks and things, but mushrooms are a good source if you don't eat eggs. I apologize, I put the web link on and realized I'd done it on a personal message to Datcha, so I've put it on again. I've put it on again to everyone. It's ATP Science, and I've given you the direct link through to the podcast bit of that website. There are hundreds of them, so, and as I say, I wouldn't expect many of you to sit through them all, because they're quite hard going, even when you kind of got a bit of the terminology in your head. But I just found it utterly fascinating listening to the ones I have today. And, you know, we're only just at the beginning of the journey of understanding how food affects us and how our physiology all works together. You know, we don't have separate bits of our body. It's all very interlinked. And we're just really on the cusp of beginning to understand how it all works together and how important what we eat is to how the body functions. Green pea powder somebody's put on.
Yeah,
I mean,
protein powder good to eat, and green pea powder.
Pea protein is a good way. Again, I chuck that into a soup or a vegetable smoothie. I suppose if you absolutely must have smoothies, we'd much rather you eat your food than drink it. But I certainly put things like pea protein into soups that I make for my elderly parents. So there are a number of these protein kind of supplements out there if you are struggling. We'd rather you try and find them for good natural sources, but if you think you are not quite getting as much protein as you should, then there can be a useful way of bumping up protein intake.
I've never come across green pea powder.
Well, it's pea protein, I think, is what they mean. You do come across that now a bit more, because whey protein used to be the most common kind of protein powder, and obviously if people don't want the milk source, then I think they've realised that there's a market for a vegetable source of protein. You can get hemp protein powder as well. I think that's got a bit more of a strong taste to it, but there's quite a few protein powders out there now.
Okay, so what is our next subject going to be?
Right, well, ask people, let's choose a date. I mean, 2 weeks today is okay for me, which I think is the 4th of November.
I think it's
No,
probably
2nd
over.
of November. 2nd of November is Tuesday.
No, we can't do 2nd of November because it's our Diwali.
Right.
So the 9th.
Yeah, I can do the
9th.
9th. I could probably do the 9th and then the 23rd. I'm going to be away the 30th and the 7th of December. So, but I could do the 9th and the 23rd and then maybe have a break and one
Okay.
back on the 14th of December, which would be the last one, maybe before the new year. But
The 9th.
are you all right for the 9th,
Yeah,
Dacia?
yeah.
Okay. Let's
Okay.
make it the 9th then.
Okay, and you're going to think of a subject?
Well, has anybody that's online at the moment got any ideas?
Well, we had 50 odd people, but some of them have decided to go
Yeah.
gluten-free. Talk more about gluten-free.
Okay, that's probably not a massive gut microbiome somebody's put there. Okay. Well, those two tie in together actually.
Yeah.
So should we go gut microbiome? Okie
Yeah.
dokie.
Okay.
All right then. So 9th of November, all about the gut. Lovely.
Yes.
Okay, well, have a good few weeks until then.
Okay.
Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you. Take care,
Thank you
everybody.
very much. Thank you very much, all the participants who took part today, and Caroline and Daksha putting in your precious time discussing fasting. And I'm sure we've all learned something from it. And yes, I will be putting out the posters in our link, in our group. So you will see it, not tonight, because it takes time to go onto my phone. So I will put it in as and when it's downloaded. Otherwise, we shall catch up on the 9th and talk about guts.
Okay. All right then. Take care.
Take care all.
Bye,
Have a
everybody.
lovely,
Bye,
lovely week.
everybody. Bye.
And happy
Bye,
Diwali
thank
in
you.
advance, because you're missing the Diwali period.
Oh,
So
yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Happy Diwali, everybody.
happy
and
Diwali to
God
everybody.
bless you all.
Happy
Take care.
Diwali.
And Guy
Bye.
Fawkes, not forgetting.
Can we have a break? Can we have a break for Diwali and eat sugary stuff? Go back to square one?
I
Only
don't
if
want to
you-
hear it.
Only if you want to undo all the hard work you've done. Then
I
you know you
know.
can find lots of recipes where you can make some Diwali treats. Just
Substitute.
reduce the sugar
Substitute.
and you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's you can
Experiment with
find a way.
recipes, reducing
Yeah.
the sugar. You
Yeah.
often
Yeah.
find you can really cut it back and it still tastes great.
Yeah, because you got
So
used
have a
to eating
go.
less. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Everybody, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.